The sound of scissors cutting through hair is surprisingly loud in the silent room. Eliza kneels on the wooden floor of the mistress's bedroom, her head forced down by a hand gripping the back of her neck. Each snip sends another lock of dark brown hair falling to the polished floor around her knees. Hair that took 17 years to grow. Hair that her mother used to braid on Sunday mornings when Eliza was small, before they were separated and sold to different plantations. Jezebel! Mistress Catherine Harrison hisses above her, the scissors flashing in the morning light. Temptress, whore. Eliza says nothing. She learned months ago that speaking only makes it worse. Apologies are taken as admissions of guilt. Silence is taken as insolence. There is no right response. There is only endurance. The scissors move to the other side of her head. More hair falls. Eliza can see it in her peripheral vision, the evidence of who she used to be scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. "Do you think you're pretty?" Catherine asks, her voice shaking with rage. "Do you think he chooses you because you're special? You're nothing. You're property. You're a filthy little slave girl who spreads her legs for her master." Eliza's throat tightens. She wants to scream, "I don't spread anything." He takes. He forces. I fight until I can't fight anymore, and then he takes anyway. But she doesn't scream. She kneels. She endures. Catherine moves to stand in front of her, grabbing Eliza's chin and forcing her head up. Her eyes are red from crying, her face blotchy with rage and humiliation, and something that might be pain if Eliza had any sympathy left to recognize it. "Look at you," Catherine says, and there's disgust in every word. "Look at what you've made me become. I was a lady. I was refined. Now I'm standing here cutting a slave's hair like some common..." She stops herself, drops the scissors. They clatter on the floor next to the pile of Eliza's hair. Then Catherine's hand draws back and slaps Eliza across the face so hard her head snaps to the side. "You will not seduce my husband again," Catherine says, her voice eerily calm now. "Do you understand me?" Eliza's cheek burns. Her scalp burns from where hair was yanked too hard during the cutting. Her ribs ache from where Catherine kicked her yesterday for looking at Master Harrison the wrong way when he walked past. And beneath all of that, deeper and more terrible, is the soreness between her legs from last night. From what Master Harrison did to her in the pantry after everyone else had gone to sleep. From the way he held her down with one hand over her mouth while she tried not to make sounds that would bring his wife running. "Answer me!" Catherine screams, all composure gone again. "Yes, ma'am," Eliza whispers. "I understand." It's a lie. Eliza understands nothing. She doesn't understand how she can be blamed for being raped. Doesn't understand how a woman can watch her husband force himself on a 17-year-old girl and decide the girl is the problem. Doesn't understand how she's supposed to not seduce a man who holds absolute power over her life. She doesn't understand any of it. She just survives it. Catherine steps back, breathing hard, staring at Eliza with something like satisfaction. "Get out of my sight and clean up this mess first. I don't want to see your filthy hair on my floor." Eliza gathers the hair with shaking hands. Her hair. The last thing about her appearance she had any control over. Now it's gone, chopped into uneven chunks that make her look like a criminal or a madwoman. She carries the hair to the trash bin in the hallway, her head feeling strangely light. In the hallway mirror, the one the house slaves use to check their appearance before serving the family, she catches a glimpse of herself. She barely recognizes the girl looking back, scalp visible in patches, face bruised, eyes hollow. This is what 7 months of being trapped between Master Harrison's assaults and Mistress Catherine's rage has done to her. 7 months ago, Eliza was almost pretty, hopeful, believing she might survive slavery with some part of herself intact. Now she's not sure there's anything left to save. But to understand how Eliza ended up here, kneeling on a bedroom floor while her hair is cut off as punishment for being raped, we need to go back. Back to when she first arrived at the Harrison Plantation in South Carolina. Back to when she still believed that working in the big house was a privilege, a stroke of luck, a chance at something better than the fields. Back to before she learned that some traps are more terrible because they look like salvation. This is the story of Eliza, a 17-year-old girl who learned that sometimes the house can be more dangerous than the fields. She was trapped between two people who should have protected her, or at least one of them should have. Instead, she became the battleground for marriage falling apart, the scapegoat for a master's violence and a mistress's humiliation. This isn't a story about heroic resistance or dramatic escape. This is about the daily torture of being blamed for your own rape. about being beaten by a woman who should have understood, who should have known better, but who chose cruelty over compassion, about being a teenage girl with nowhere to run, no one to help, and no hope that tomorrow will be different from today. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and if this is the first time you're hearing about stories like this, because this is the reality they don't teach in schools. This is what happened to thousands of enslaved girls who worked in plantation houses, who were considered lucky to be inside, who discovered that proximity to power meant proximity to danger. Subscribe if you want to hear the truth about slavery. The uncomfortable truth. Truth that shows how sexual violence and psychological torture were built into the system. The truth about how women participated in the cruelty. The truth that doesn't fit into neat narratives about good and evil. This is Eliza's truth, and she deserves to be remembered. The Harrison Plantation sat on 800 acres of prime South Carolina cotton land, 20 miles outside of Charleston. In the spring of 1857, it was considered one of the more civilized operations in the region, a term that meant the master didn't whip his slaves publicly, and the mistress occasionally distributed old dresses to the house servants. Civilized. As if cruelty could be made acceptable through manners. Master Richard Harrison was 42 years old, tall and handsome in the way that Southern gentlemen were supposed to be. He had inherited the plantation from his father and expanded it through careful management and what he called firm but fair treatment of his property. He attended church every Sunday. He read poetry. He was considered by Charleston society to be a refined man, educated at the College of Charleston, well-traveled, sophisticated. He was also a rapist, but that word was never used. Men like Richard Harrison didn't rape. They simply exercised their property rights over human beings they owned. His wife, Catherine Harrison, was 36 years old. She had been beautiful once, still was, in a brittle, nervous way. She came from a prominent Charleston family and had married Richard when she was 19, believing she was securing a good life. A big house, social standing, children who would inherit wealth and position. She got the house and the standing, but the children never came. 3 pregnancies, 3 miscarriages. The doctor said her womb was weak. Richard said nothing, but his disappointment was palpable. A wife who couldn't provide heirs was a failure, regardless of her other qualities. Catherine spent her days managing the household, planning elaborate dinners, and trying desperately to maintain the fiction that her marriage was successful. She took laudanum for her nerves. She embroidered. She visited with other plantation wives and discussed the servant problem, the difficulty of managing slaves, the burden of civilizing an inferior race. She pretended not to know that her husband regularly forced himself on the enslaved women under his control. Or maybe she did know, but had constructed an elaborate mental framework where it wasn't really his fault. The women tempted him. They were naturally immoral. They used their wiles to trap good men. Either way, she survived by blaming the victims. The Harrison house itself was imposing, a 2-story structure with white columns and a wide veranda designed to impress visitors and demonstrate wealth. Inside, it was furnished with imported furniture, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings of Richard's ancestors looking stern and prosperous. The house required a staff of 12 enslaved people to maintain. There was Cook, an older woman named Betty who ran the kitchen with absolute authority. There was Samuel, the butler, who served meals and answered the door. There were 3 laundry women who worked in a separate building behind the main house. There were 2 gardeners who maintained the elaborate flower beds and vegetable gardens. And there were the house girls, younger women who cleaned, served, assisted the mistress with dressing and personal needs, and did whatever other tasks arose. This was considered the elite position among the enslaved people on the Harrison Plantation. House servants got better food, leftovers from the main house, instead of the basic rations provided to field workers. They got better clothing, cast-offs from the family, instead of the rough Osnaburg fabric that field workers wore. They worked indoors, protected from the brutal sun and physical demands of cotton cultivation. Other enslaved people looked at house servants with a mixture of envy and pity. Yes, the work was easier, but you were always visible, always being watched, always one mistake away from being sent to the fields or sold away entirely. And for young women, there was another danger that everyone whispered about, but no one could prevent. Masters noticed house girls. Masters had access to house girls. Masters could do whatever they wanted to house girls because the girls lived under the same roof, worked in the same spaces, had no protection and no escape. Eliza had arrived at the Harrison Plantation in October 1856. Purchased at a Charleston auction after the plantation where she'd been born, was sold to settle debts. She was 16 years old. small for her age, with dark brown hair she wore in a single braid down her back and large brown eyes that still held some hope that life might get better. She'd been separated from her mother during the sale. Her mother went to a rice plantation further south. Eliza went to the Harrison place. They didn't get to say goodbye. The auction house didn't allow that kind of delay. Richard Harrison purchased her specifically to work in the house. He needed another servant. One of his previous housegirls had gotten pregnant. By him, though, that was never stated, and had been sent to work in the fields where her condition would be less visible and less embarrassing. Eliza was chosen because she was young, healthy, and what the auctioneer called bright, which meant she could follow complex instructions, could learn quickly, understood her place. For the first few months, Eliza thought she'd gotten lucky. The Harrison house was clean, well-maintained. Betty in the kitchen was stern but fair, teaching Eliza how to serve properly, how to move through rooms without being noticed, how to anticipate the family's needs before they were voiced. Samuel, the butler, was kind in his distant way. He'd been at the Harrison place for 20 years and had learned to survive through perfect service and invisible presence. He taught Eliza the rules. Never look the master or mistress directly in the eye. Never speak unless spoken to. Never show emotion regardless of what you're feeling. Move quickly, but quietly. Be everywhere you're needed and nowhere you're not wanted. The other house servants, women named Charlotte and Mary, were friendly enough, but guarded. Eliza noticed they never seemed to be alone in rooms. They moved in pairs when possible. They tensed when Master Harrison entered a space. She didn't understand why at first. Eliza's duties were relatively simple. She cleaned the main floor rooms, the parlor, the dining room, the library. She helped serve meals, standing against the wall ready to refill water glasses or bring additional dishes from the kitchen. She assisted with laundry on Mondays. She helped Mistress Catherine dress in the mornings, lacing her corset, arranging her hair, selecting her jewelry. Catherine was demanding, but not cruel at first. She corrected Eliza frequently. The girl was too slow, too clumsy, didn't understand how things should be done. But she didn't hit her, didn't scream. Just maintained a constant stream of criticism that wore Eliza down, but seemed like something she could endure. Master Harrison barely seemed to notice her. He'd walk past her in the hallway without acknowledgement. He'd sit at the dinner table while she served, never making eye contact, never speaking directly to her. Eliza thought this was good. Invisibility felt safe. She was wrong. At night, Eliza slept in a small room off the kitchen with Charlotte and Mary. The three of them shared 2 narrow beds and a chest where they kept their few possessions. It was cramped but warm, especially in winter when heat from the kitchen stove seeped through the walls. They talked sometimes, in whispers, after the house had gone silent. Charlotte was 23, had been at the Harrison place for 6 years. Mary was 19, had been there for 3 years. They'd learned to survive. They'd learned the rules. Don't ever be alone with him, Charlotte told Eliza one night. Her voice so quiet, Eliza almost didn't hear her. Always make sure someone else is around. If he calls you to his study, say you'll get Samuel. If he asks you to bring something to his room, ask Betty to send it up instead. Why? Eliza asked, though part of her already knew. Charlotte and Mary exchanged looks. Just don't, Mary said finally. Trust us. Don't ever be alone with him. Eliza tried to follow this advice. For months, she succeeded. She moved through the house like a ghost, doing her work efficiently, always ensuring other people were nearby, always finding excuses to avoid situations where she'd be isolated with Master Harrison. She thought she was safe. She thought if she just worked hard and stayed careful, she could avoid whatever had put that haunted look in Charlotte's and Mary's eyes. She was 17 years old and still believed that good behavior could protect her. That innocence lasted until February 1857, when Master Harrison finally noticed that the new housegirl had been avoiding him and decided to do something about it. Before everything went dark, there were moments of light. Eliza found them in small pockets of time. Sunday afternoons when the house servants got a few hours of rest, early mornings before the family woke, when she could sit in the kitchen with Betty and drink real coffee instead of the chicory substitute the field workers got. Late evenings when Charlotte and Mary would tell stories about their lives before slavery, before the Harrison place, before everything became about survival. Betty became something like a mother figure to Eliza. The older woman was 60-something, had worked in kitchens her whole life, had learned to create elaborate meals from limited ingredients, and to navigate the dangerous waters of white people's expectations. She taught Eliza more than just how to serve. She taught her how to read a room, how to sense when someone's mood was dangerous, how to make herself small when necessary, and how to seem confident when required. You got to learn 2 things to survive in a house like this, Betty told her one morning while they prepared breakfast. First, you got to know when to speak and when to shut your mouth. Second, you got to remember that white folks' problems ain't your problems, even when they try to make them your problems. Eliza was kneading dough for biscuits, her hands working the mixture with the rhythm Betty had taught her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Betty said, checking the ham in the oven, "when the master and mistress fight, that's their business. When she gets angry because he's doing what he's doing, that's between them. Don't let them make you part of it. Don't take on their guilt or their shame or their rage. You just do your work and keep your soul separate from all their mess." Eliza didn't fully understand then. It seemed impossible to keep yourself separate when you lived in someone else's house, cleaned their rooms, served their meals, existed entirely within the space they controlled. But Betty had survived 60 years of slavery by maintaining some internal boundary between who she was and what she was forced to do. Eliza was learning to do the same. Charlotte and Mary became her sisters in everything but blood. The 3 girls grew close in the way that shared trauma creates bonds. They protected each other, warned each other about dangers, shared the small pleasures that made life bearable. Charlotte had a beautiful singing voice. Sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and they were sure no one would hear, she'd sing spirituals her grandmother had taught her. Songs about freedom, about crossing over Jordan, about a better world waiting somewhere beyond this one. Mary was funny. Could make Eliza laugh even on the hardest days. She'd imitate Mistress Catherine's fussy way of speaking, or Master Harrison's pompous tone when he lectured about responsibility and duty. In those moments, when Mary transformed the people who controlled their lives into objects of ridicule, Eliza felt a tiny spark of power. They couldn't control their lives, but they could control how they thought about their oppressors. Eliza herself brought a different quality to their small group. She could read and write, her previous master's wife had taught her, believing that literate slaves were more useful. She'd read aloud to Charlotte and Mary from newspapers they found in the trash, from books she snuck from the library when no one was looking. She read them about a man named Frederick Douglass, who'd escaped slavery and was speaking out against it, about tensions between North and South over the expansion of slavery, about a woman named Harriet Tubman who was helping enslaved people escape North. These stories were dangerous. If they were caught with such material, the consequences would be severe, but the knowledge was precious. It reminded them that the world was bigger than the Harrison Plantation, that somewhere people were fighting for freedom, that someday, maybe not soon, maybe not in their lifetimes, but someday, things might change. On Sundays, when they had a few free hours, the 3 girls would sometimes walk to the small cemetery at the edge of the property, where enslaved people who died on the plantation were buried. They'd sit under a large oak tree and talk about their dreams. Charlotte wanted to learn to read, wanted to read the Bible herself, instead of having white preachers tell her what it said. Mary wanted to have children someday, wanted to raise them herself instead of having them sold away. Eliza wanted to find her mother again, wanted to hug her one more time, wanted to tell her everything that had happened since they were separated. They were modest dreams, not freedom. That seemed too impossible to even imagine. Just small human wants. The ability to read, the chance to be a mother, the opportunity to see a loved one again. Even these seemed out of reach. But dreaming them together made them feel slightly less impossible. There were other small joys too. The taste of real sugar, snuck from the pantry when Betty wasn't looking. The feel of silk fabric when Eliza helped Mistress Catherine dress. The luxury of it so different from the rough cotton of her own clothing. The sound of rain on the roof, which meant a day when maybe they wouldn't have to work quite as hard because the family would stay inside and quiet. The moments when they could just be young women instead of slaves, laughing about silly things, sharing secrets, braiding each other's hair, existing as people with thoughts and feelings and desires beyond their labor. Eliza's hair was her pride. She kept it long, washed it carefully with the soap Betty made, braided it each morning with practiced efficiency. It was one of the few things about her appearance she controlled. In a world where she owned nothing, not even her own body, her hair felt like it was hers. Charlotte often braided it for her on Sunday mornings, weaving it into complex patterns that made Eliza feel pretty, that made her feel like maybe she was more than just a servant, more than just property. "You got beautiful hair," Charlotte would say, her fingers working quickly. "Don't let nobody tell you different." Eliza would close her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that she was a free woman getting her hair done for a social event, that she had choices about where she went and what she did, that her body belonged to herself. These were the moments that sustained her, the connections to Betty, Charlotte, and Mary, the small acts of care they showed each other, the ways they tried to preserve their humanity in a system designed to destroy it. These moments made life bearable, until they didn't, until Master Harrison decided that Eliza had avoided him long enough, until everything that made her life bearable was systematically destroyed, until she learned that sometimes the things you love most are the things that get taken from you first. It started small, so small that Eliza almost didn't notice at first. Master Harrison began appearing in rooms where she was working. Nothing obvious. He'd walk into the library while she was dusting shelves. He'd pass through the dining room while she was setting the table for dinner. He'd come into the pantry while she was taking inventory of supplies. At first, Eliza thought it was coincidence. The house wasn't that large. Of course, their paths would cross. But then she noticed the pattern. He only seemed to appear when she was alone. When Charlotte or Mary or Samuel were in the room, he'd walk through quickly, barely acknowledging anyone. But when Eliza was by herself, he'd linger. He didn't speak to her, not at first, just watched. Eliza felt his eyes on her like a physical weight. She'd be reaching for a book on a high shelf and feel the back of her neck prickle with awareness. She'd be bent over, organizing the pantry, and know without turning around that he was standing in the doorway. She started working faster, trying to finish tasks before he could appear. She started asking other servants to help her even when she didn't need help, violating the efficiency that house servants prided themselves on just to ensure she wasn't alone. Charlotte noticed. "He's watching you," she said one night, her voice flat. "I know," Eliza whispered. "Be careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Always make sure." "I am being careful," Eliza insisted. "I'm not stupid." But careful wasn't enough, because Master Harrison owned the house, owned the plantation, owned her. He could create situations where she had no choice but to be alone. The first time he touched her was in late February. Eliza had been sent to his study to clean the fireplace, a task that required her to be on her hands and knees, scooping out ash, her back to the door. She checked first. The study was empty. She thought she had time to finish before he appeared. She was wrong. She didn't hear him enter. Didn't realize he was there until his hand was on her shoulder. Eliza jumped, nearly dropped the ash bucket. "Hey, sir," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were..." "It's all right," he said, and his voice was gentle. That's what she remembered most later, how gentle his voice was. "You're doing fine work, Eliza. I've noticed how hard you work." "Thank you, sir." She tried to move past him toward the door, but he was blocking the way. "You've been here almost 6 months now," he continued, still in that gentle voice. "Are you happy here?" What a question. Was she happy? She was enslaved. Happiness wasn't a relevant concept. "Yes, sir," she lied. "Good. I want you to be happy." His hand moved from her shoulder to her face, fingertips brushing her cheek. "You're such a pretty girl." Eliza froze. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, but she couldn't. He was the master. You didn't pull away from the master. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. His thumb traced her lower lip. "So pretty." Then footsteps in the hallway. Catherine's voice calling for someone. Richard stepped back immediately, his expression unchanging. "Finish cleaning the fireplace," he said in a normal tone. "And make sure to clean under the desk as well." "Yes, sir." He left. Eliza stood there shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might vomit. That night, she told Charlotte and Mary what had happened. "It's starting," Charlotte said, her face grim. "What do I do?" Eliza asked desperately. "There's nothing you can do," Mary said quietly. "When a master decides he wants you, there's nothing you can do." "I'll stay with other people. I'll make sure I'm never alone. He'll create situations where you are alone," Charlotte interrupted. "He'll send the others away. He'll call you to places where no one else is. He owns this house, Eliza. He owns everything in it, including us. So I just let him." The words tasted like ash. "What choice do we have?" Mary asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, just exhausted acceptance. But Eliza wasn't ready to accept. She was 17. She still believed that if she was just careful enough, smart enough, she could avoid this. She tried everything. She worked faster, finishing tasks before he could appear. She volunteered for duties that kept her in the kitchen with Betty or in the laundry with the other women. She made herself as invisible as possible. Tried to become a shadow that no one noticed. But Richard Harrison noticed everything. He began calling her to bring him things. Coffee in his study, a book from the library, messages to be delivered, always reasons that seemed legitimate, that she couldn't refuse without blatant disobedience. And Catherine noticed too. Noticed how often her husband summoned the new house girl. Noticed how he looked at her. And instead of confronting her husband, instead of protecting a 17-year-old girl, Catherine's rage turned where it always turned in households like this, toward the victim. The trap was closing. It happened on a Tuesday night in March 1857. Eliza had been sent to the pantry to retrieve preserves for the next day's breakfast. It was late, past 10 o'clock, and the rest of the house staff had already gone to their quarters. She thought she was safe. The family had retired to their rooms. The house was quiet. She was reaching for a jar on a high shelf when she heard the door close behind her. She turned. Master Harrison stood blocking the only exit, a lamp in his hand, casting shadows across his face. "Sir," Eliza said, her voice shaking, "I was just getting the preserves for tomorrow." "I know what you're doing," he said quietly. "I sent you here." The world seemed to tilt. I should go. Betty's asleep. Everyone is asleep." He set the lamp down on a shelf. "It's just us, Eliza. Please," she whispered. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. I've worked hard. I know you have." He moved closer. "That's why you deserve a reward. That's why I've been so patient." Patient. As if his restraint was a kindness. As if he wasn't a 42-year-old man cornering a 17-year-old girl he owned. Eliza backed up until she hit the shelves behind her. Jars rattled. "Sir, please, I don't want—" "What do you want?" he interrupted. "Is irrelevant. You're mine, Eliza. My property. Do you understand?" She understood. She'd always understood. But understanding didn't make it easier when he grabbed her arm, when he pulled her toward him, when his other hand covered her mouth before she could scream. She fought. Of course she fought. She kicked. She tried to bite the hand covering her mouth. She twisted in his grip. But he was a full-grown man, and she was a malnourished teenage girl. The outcome was never in doubt.
The pantry floor was hard and cold. Eliza stopped fighting eventually, stopped struggling, and just lay there while he did what he wanted. She focused on a jar of peaches on the shelf above her head, counted the individual pieces of fruit suspended in syrup, and tried to separate her mind from what was happening to her body. When it was over, he stood up, adjusted his clothing, looked down at her with something like satisfaction. "Clean yourself up," he said, "and don't tell anyone. If you do, I'll say you seduced me, that you're a Jezebel who tempted me. Who do you think they'll believe?" He left, took the lamp with him. Eliza lay in the darkness for a long time, her body screaming pain, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Eventually, she forced herself up, found water to clean herself with, pulled her torn dress back together as best she could. She made it back to the servants' quarters somehow. Charlotte and Mary were asleep. She climbed into bed without waking them, curled into a ball, and didn't cry, because crying would wake them and she didn't have words for this yet. She thought, tomorrow I'll figure out what to do. But tomorrow, Catherine Harrison was waiting. Mistress Catherine had heard something the night before, a noise from downstairs, female voices, or maybe a cry. She'd gone to check, had seen the pantry door closed, had heard sounds from inside that she recognized. She knew what her husband was doing, had known for years, had learned to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening, to maintain the fiction that her marriage was respectable. But something about this time was different. Maybe because Eliza was so young, maybe because Catherine had seen how Richard looked at her, maybe because the girl was in the house every day, a constant reminder of her husband's infidelity. Whatever the reason, Catherine's carefully constructed denial shattered, and her rage had to go somewhere. It couldn't go toward Richard. He was her husband, her social standing, her economic security. Confronting him meant destroying her own life. So it went where it always went, toward the enslaved girl who allowed it to happen. Eliza was summoned to Catherine's bedroom the next morning. She walked in to find the mistress standing by the window, her back rigid, her hands clenched. "Close the door," Catherine said. Eliza closed it. "Did you think I didn't know?" Catherine's voice was eerily calm. "Did you think I was stupid?" "Ma'am, I don't lie to me." Catherine spun around and her face was twisted with rage. "You know what you did last night. I know what you've been doing, throwing yourself at my husband, using your wiles to seduce him." "I didn't," Eliza started, but Catherine crossed the room and slapped her so hard she tasted blood. "You don't speak unless I tell you to speak," Catherine hissed. "You're a whore, a Jezebel, a temptress. He spreads her legs for a married man." The words hit harder than the slap, because part of Eliza, some terrible broken part, wondered if maybe Catherine was right. Maybe she had done something to cause this. Maybe she had looked at him wrong, or moved wrong, or existed wrong. That's what sexual violence does. It makes you doubt your own innocence. "You will not seduce my husband again. Do you understand me?" Eliza wanted to scream. "I didn't seduce him. He raped me. He held me down and raped me." But she couldn't, because in 1857, enslaved women couldn't be raped in any legal sense. The law didn't recognize their right to refuse, and Catherine wouldn't believe her anyway. Catherine needed to believe that Eliza was the problem, because if Richard was the problem, then Catherine's entire life was a lie. So Eliza said what she had to say. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." But Catherine wasn't satisfied with words. She needed Eliza to hurt, needed her to pay, needed to punish someone, and since she couldn't punish Richard, Eliza would have to do. "You think you're pretty?" Catherine grabbed Eliza's braid, yanked her head back. "You think your looks give you power over men?" "No, ma'am," Eliza gasped. "You're right, they don't." Catherine pulled her toward the vanity where scissors lay. "Not anymore." That's when she cut Eliza's hair, cut it in ragged chunks while Eliza knelt on the floor. Cut away the one thing Eliza had been proud of, the one aspect of her appearance she controlled. And the whole time, Catherine called her names: whore, Jezebel, temptress, homewrecker, as if Eliza had any power in this situation, as if she had chosen any of this. When the cutting was done, Catherine wasn't finished. She kicked Eliza in the ribs once, twice, 3 times, slapped her again, spit on her. "Get out," she finally said. "Get out of my sight, and if I catch you looking at my husband again, I'll have you sold south. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Eliza gathered her hair and left, made it to the kitchen before her legs gave out. Betty found her there, shaking, her scalp bleeding in places where hair had been torn out, her face bruised, her ribs screaming. "Oh, baby," Betty breathed, kneeling beside her. "Oh, honey." "She blamed me," Eliza whispered. "He raped me and she blamed me." Betty held her while she finally cried, held her and rocked her and said nothing, because what was there to say? This was the trap. This was what happened to young women in plantation houses. They were caught between masters who raped them and mistresses who blamed them, and there was no escape. That night became Eliza's new normal. Richard would find her alone, in the pantry, in empty rooms, anywhere he could corner her. He'd rape her. She'd stopped fighting because fighting only made it hurt more. Then Catherine would find evidence, a torn dress, a noise, Eliza's expression the next day, and punish her, beat her, call her names, cut her hair again when it started growing back, make her life hell. Eliza was trapped between 2 tormentors, blamed for her own rape, punished for being a victim. And it went on, week after week, month after month, until Eliza stopped being a person and became just a body that endured,
a shell that survived because dying seemed harder than living. This is the reality of slavery that nobody talks about. The sexual violence, the victim blaming, how women participated in the cruelty. If you want to understand the full truth, subscribe, because Eliza's story isn't over, and what happens next will show you that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit finds ways to survive. July 1857. 5 months of hell. Eliza no longer recognized herself in mirrors. Her hair was a ragged mess of uneven chunks. Her face was perpetually bruised. Catherine had stopped caring if marks showed. Her ribs were cracked in at least 2 places, never given time to heal properly before new beatings. She walked hunched over, protecting her torso, moving like an old woman instead of a 17-year-old girl. She'd stopped dreaming, stopped hoping, stopped being anything except a thing that survived. Charlotte and Mary tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. Betty snuck her extra food when she could, tried to treat her injuries with herbs and poultices. Samuel looked the other way when she needed to hide, gave her warnings when Richard was looking for her. But none of it was enough. The assaults continued, the beatings continued. The trap had no exit. Until one night when something inside Eliza broke. Not broke in the way that meant giving up, broke in a different way, a way that meant she had nothing left to lose. It was after another assault in the pantry. Richard had finished, had told her to clean herself up, had left her on the floor like trash. Eliza lay there in the darkness, tasting blood where she'd bitten her own lip to keep from making sounds, feeling the familiar soreness that would last for days. And something crystallized in her mind. She was going to die here, whether from the beatings or from infection or from finally just giving up. She was going to die on this plantation. There was no escape, no rescue, no hope of freedom. She was 17 years old and her life was effectively over. But if she was going to die anyway, why not make it mean something? The thought was so shocking she almost didn't recognize it as hers. But once it arrived, it wouldn't leave. She could survive, let them slowly destroy her until she was nothing. Or she could choose how this ended. Eliza pulled herself up off the pantry floor, cleaned herself with shaking hands, fixed her torn dress, and made a decision. She didn't know yet what the decision meant exactly, didn't have a plan, just knew that something fundamentally had shifted inside her. She was done being passive, done just enduring, done accepting that her only option was survival through submission. Over the next few weeks, Eliza began paying attention in new ways. She noticed that Catherine took laudanum every night before bed, noticed how much she took, where she kept it, how deeply it made her sleep. She noticed Richard's patterns, when he drank more than usual, when he was careless about locking doors, when his guard was down.
She noticed Betty's herbs, the ones for healing, and the others. The ones Betty kept locked away, the ones she said were dangerous, the ones that could hurt instead of heal if used wrong. She noticed the knives in the kitchen, the heavy iron pots, the steep stairs leading to the second floor where bedrooms were located. She started noticing everything with new eyes, not the eyes of a victim, but the eyes of someone planning something she didn't yet have words for. Charlotte noticed the change. "What are you thinking?" she asked one night when they were alone. "Nothing," Eliza lied. "Don't do anything stupid. Don't give them a reason to..." "To what?" Eliza interrupted. "To beat me more? To rape me more? What worse thing can they possibly do to me, Charlotte? I'm already living in hell." Charlotte had no answer. Eliza began testing small things. She accidentally spilled hot coffee on Richard once. Not enough to truly hurt him, just enough to see his reaction, to see if she could get away with small acts of resistance. He cursed, but blamed her clumsiness. No punishment beyond Catherine's usual rage. She forgot to complete tasks that Catherine had assigned, claimed she'd misunderstood instructions, tested how far she could push before consequences escalated. The consequences came. More beatings, more verbal abuse, but nothing worse than what was already happening. She was building a map in her mind of what she could get away with, of where the boundaries were, of what was possible. She didn't know yet what she was planning. Escape seemed impossible. Where would she go? How would she survive alone with no papers, no money, no skills beyond housework? Revenge seemed suicidal. Hurting a white person meant death, and probably death in the most painful way possible. But something was growing inside her. Some core of rage that had been compressed under months of abuse, now expanding, filling all the spaces where hope used to be. She began noticing other things too. The tension between Richard and Catherine had escalated. They barely spoke to each other anymore except to snap insults. Catherine's laudanum use had increased. Richard spent more time in his study, drinking, looking at Eliza with a mixture of desire and contempt. The household was fracturing, and fractures created opportunities. Eliza didn't have formal education in strategy, but she had something else. Desperate intelligence born from trying to survive impossible circumstances. She started keeping a mental list of every time Richard assaulted her, of every beating Catherine delivered, of every humiliation, every injury, every violation. She memorized it all. Because even if she couldn't make them pay now, someday, somehow, she wanted a record. She wanted someone to know exactly what had been done to her. Betty found her one night in the kitchen, staring at nothing, her hands clenched into fists. "Baby, what's going on in that head of yours?" Betty asked gently. Eliza looked at the old woman who'd been kind to her, who'd tried to protect her. "Do you ever think about freedom, Betty?" "Every day. But thinking about it don't make it real." "What if it could be real?" Betty's eyes went sharp. "Don't talk like that. That kind of thinking gets you killed." "I'm already dying," Eliza said simply, just slowly. Betty had no response to that, because it was true. They were all dying slowly. Slavery was just a long, drawn-out death. The question was whether you died passive or active, whether you died as a victim or as someone who fought back. Eliza hadn't decided yet which death she'd choose, but she was thinking about it, planning, watching, waiting. And somewhere in the darkness of her mind, a plan was forming. Not escape, not yet, but something. Something that would make her tormentors understand that even a 17-year-old enslaved girl with no power, no rights, no protection, even she could make them pay. She just had to be smart about it, patient, careful. She had to learn from them, from Richard's casual cruelty, from Catherine's strategic rage. She had to become what they'd made her, someone with nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people in the world. August came to South Carolina with suffocating heat and humidity that made the air feel like breathing through wet cloth. Eliza moved through the Harrison house like a ghost. She did her work mechanically. She endured Richard's assaults with dead eyes and a body that had learned to dissociate, to be somewhere else while he used her. She survived Catherine's beatings by going somewhere deep inside herself, where fists couldn't reach. But underneath the surface, she was thinking. She'd noticed something interesting. On the nights when Richard drank heavily, and he was drinking more as the summer progressed, as his marriage deteriorated further, he slept deeply. Almost nothing could wake him. She'd also noticed that Catherine's laudanum use had reached dangerous levels. The mistress was taking it 3, sometimes 4 times a day. At night, she was comatose. 2 people, deeply asleep, in a house full of potential accidents. The idea came slowly, not all at once. Just small thoughts that began connecting like a web being spun in darkness. What if Richard fell down the stairs one night when he was drunk? What if Catherine took too much laudanum and simply never woke up? What if the house caught fire during the night when no one could escape? These thoughts should have horrified her. Eliza had been raised with religion, with the idea that murder was the worst sin, that vengeance belonged to God alone. But she'd also been raped repeatedly by a man who went to church every Sunday. She'd been beaten by a woman who read her Bible daily. She'd learned that morality was a luxury that enslaved people couldn't afford. Besides, was it really murder to defend yourself? Even if the defense came months after the attack? Even if it meant ensuring your attackers could never hurt you again? Eliza wrestled with these questions in the darkness of her room at night, while Charlotte and Mary slept beside her, oblivious to the thoughts churning in her mind. She began paying closer attention to the house's vulnerabilities. The loose board on the second-floor landing, where the front door's lock was old and faulty. The fact that the water buckets for putting out fires were kept far from the main house. She noticed how Betty stored certain herbs, the ones that were medicinal in small doses, but poisonous in larger ones. Foxglove for the heart, hemlock for pain. Others whose names she didn't know, but whose effects Betty had described in passing. She noticed that Richard kept a pistol in his study desk, that the ammunition was in a separate drawer, that he rarely cleaned it and might not notice if something was wrong with it. She was gathering information, not because she'd decided to act, just because knowing gave her a sense of control she hadn't felt in months. Knowledge was power, even if she never used it. But then, in late August, something happened that tipped Eliza from planning to action. She discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly. Missed monthly bleeding, morning nausea, breasts that were tender and swollen. Betty noticed before Eliza did, saw the signs, and pulled her aside one morning. "How far along?" Betty asked quietly. I don't know." Eliza's voice shook. "Maybe 2 months." Betty's face was grave. "Master Richards? Who else's?" Eliza's laugh was bitter. "I haven't been with anyone by choice." The pregnancy changed everything, because Eliza knew what happened to enslaved women who got pregnant by their masters. Sometimes they were sold away, evidence removed. Sometimes they were kept but made to work until they miscarried. Sometimes the babies were born and immediately sold. Sometimes the mistress found ways to make sure the pregnancy didn't continue. Eliza had seen it before. Pregnant women beaten in specific ways, given herbs that caused cramping and bleeding, made to lift impossibly heavy loads. She looked down at her still flat stomach and thought, there's a baby in there. A baby who didn't ask to be created. A baby who would be born into slavery. Who would be Richard Harrison's legal property. Who would suffer just as Eliza had suffered. That baby deserved better. And the only way to give it better was to ensure Richard Harrison couldn't hurt anyone ever again. The decision crystallized in that moment. Not revenge exactly. Protection. She was protecting her unborn child. Protecting future girls who might work in this house. Protecting herself. She was going to kill Richard Harrison. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt eerily calm. Like she'd finally found her purpose. Like all the suffering had been leading to this moment. She had maybe 4 or 5 months before the pregnancy became obvious. Before Catherine noticed. Before her window of opportunity closed. She needed a plan that wouldn't immediately point to her. Something that looked like an accident or natural causes. She began researching. She asked Betty about herbs, using casual questions about cooking, about flavoring. She listened when Samuel talked about the master's drinking habits. She watched Richard's patterns when he was most careless, most vulnerable. She was 17 years old, pregnant from rape, beaten regularly, with nowhere to run and no one to help her. So she decided to help herself. And if that meant murder, well, they'd already murdered who she used to be. This was just finishing the job. September 15th, 1857. The night started ordinary. Dinner was served. Catherine picked at her food and took her laudanum before the meal even ended. Richard drank 3 glasses of whiskey with dinner and retreated to his study for more. Eliza served, cleared plates, cleaned the dining room. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. She'd been planning this for 3 weeks, going over every detail, every potential problem. Tonight, Richard would die. She'd chosen poison. Specifically, she'd chosen hemlock, a plant Betty had warned her about, that grew wild near the swamps, that was dangerous even to handle without care. Eliza had collected it carefully over several days. She dried it, ground it, prepared it exactly as she'd learned from books she'd snuck from the library, from listening to Betty talk about dangerous plants. Hemlock caused paralysis. The victim remained conscious, but unable to move, unable to breathe properly. Death came from respiratory failure, slowly, over hours. It seemed fitting. Richard had paralyzed her in a different way. Now he'd understand what it felt like to be unable to move, unable to escape, unable to do anything but wait for the end. She ground the hemlock into a fine powder and hidden it in her pocket. All she needed was an opportunity to put it in his drink when no one was looking. The opportunity came around 9 p.m. Richard called for more whiskey. Samuel was busy helping Catherine up to bed. The laudanum had hit harder than usual tonight. Betty was in the kitchen finishing cleanup. Eliza brought the whiskey decanter to Richard's study. He was alone, sitting at his desk. Papers spread before him. He barely looked up when she entered. "Just leave it," he said, waving at the side table. Eliza poured him a glass. Her hands were steady as she added the powdered hemlock to the amber liquid, stirring it with a small rod kept for that purpose. The powder dissolved completely. You couldn't see it, couldn't smell it. She set the glass on his desk. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice neutral. No. He still wasn't looking at her. "Close the door when you leave." Eliza left, closed the door, went back to the kitchen, and continued her normal evening tasks. She cleaned dishes, swept floors, prepared tomorrow's breakfast ingredients. Everything normal, everything routine. Inside, she was counting minutes. Hemlock took about 30 minutes to start working. Within an hour, Richard would begin feeling strange, tingling in his extremities, weakness, difficulty moving. By the second hour, he'd be paralyzed, unable to call for help, unable to move. By morning, he'd be dead. Eliza finished her kitchen work, said goodnight to Betty, went to the servants' quarters where Charlotte and Mary were already asleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle into nighttime quiet. Somewhere above her, Richard Harrison was drinking poisoned whiskey. Somewhere above her, a rapist was dying. She felt no guilt, no remorse. Just a cold satisfaction that justice, however imperfect, however violent, was being served. Around 10 p.m., she heard a thump from upstairs. Then silence. Around midnight, she heard footsteps. Someone moving around, probably Richard trying to get up, unable to control his limbs properly. Then silence again. Eliza waited. The night stretched on forever, and not long enough. By dawn, she knew it was done. She could feel it somehow. The house felt different, lighter. She got up, dressed, went to start her morning duties in the kitchen. Betty was already there, preparing breakfast. Normal routine, normal morning. Except when Samuel went to wake Master Harrison for breakfast, he found the man dead in his study, slumped over his desk, eyes open but unseeing. Glass of whiskey spilled beside him. The house erupted into chaos. Catherine screamed and screamed when they told her. Doctor was summoned. Richard's body was examined. The doctor's verdict, heart failure, brought on by excessive drinking. The master had been under stress, had been drinking heavily. His heart simply gave out. No one suspected poison. Why would they? Enslaved people didn't murder their masters. That was unthinkable. Eliza went about her duties, outwardly calm, inwardly singing. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Richard Harrison was dead, and everyone thought it was natural causes. For the first time in 7 months, Eliza felt safe, felt like she could breathe. The man who'd raped her was gone. The baby growing inside her would never know him, would never be abused by him. She'd protected herself, protected her child. She'd won. But the relief lasted exactly 3 days, because Catherine, in her grief and rage and suspicion, turned her full attention to the girl who'd seduced her husband. And this time, Catherine wanted more than beatings. She wanted Eliza gone. 3 days after Richard's death, Catherine summoned Eliza to the parlor. The mistress looked terrible. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but there was something else in them too. Suspicion. "My husband is dead," Catherine said, her voice eerily calm. "Yes, ma'am," Eliza replied. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" Catherine studied her face. "Are you really?" Eliza kept her expression neutral. "Of course, ma'am. The doctor says it was his heart, that the drinking weakened it and it simply gave out." Catherine stood, began pacing. "But I don't believe that. Richard was only 42. He was strong, healthy. I wouldn't know, ma'am." "No, you wouldn't." Catherine stopped pacing, turned to face Eliza directly. "But you know something. I can see it in your eyes. You're hiding something." Eliza's heart began racing, but she kept her face blank. "I don't know what you mean, ma'am." "You killed him," Catherine said flatly. "I don't know how, but you did. You're clever enough. You have access to the kitchen, to his food and drink. You killed my husband." "No, ma'am. I would never. Don't lie to me." Catherine's voice rose. "You hated him. He used you, and you hated him for it. So you killed him." The accusation hung in the air. Eliza made a decision. She looked Catherine directly in the eyes, breaking every rule of slave conduct, and said, "He raped me, repeatedly, for 7 months. And you blamed me for it. You beat me for being raped. So yes, I hated him, but I didn't kill him." The words were like a slap. Catherine's face went white, then red. "How dare dare you?" she whispered. "How dare you speak to me like that?" "What are you going to do?" Eliza asked, and there was something reckless in her now. "Beat me more? Have me sold? I'm already in hell, ma'am. You can't make it worse." Catherine's eyes went to Eliza's stomach. Still flat, but Catherine knew how to read signs. "You're pregnant?" Catherine said. "With his child." Eliza said nothing. "That's why you killed him. You're carrying his bastard, and you wanted revenge." "I didn't kill him," Eliza repeated. "But if I had, would you blame me?" The question seemed to genuinely shock Catherine. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Maybe recognition that her husband had been a monster, that Eliza had been a victim, that Catherine's own actions had been monstrous too. But then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "I'm selling you," Catherine said. "Tomorrow. To a trader heading to the Deep South. I don't care what price I get. I want you gone from my sight." Eliza felt the ground drop out from under her. The Deep South meant sugar plantations, rice fields, conditions that killed enslaved people within years. It meant never seeing anyone she knew again. It meant her baby being born into even worse slavery. "Please," Eliza whispered, all her false bravery gone. "Please, don't sell me south. I'll do anything. You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for my husband." There it was again, the victim blaming. Catherine would rather believe Eliza had seduced Richard than face the truth that her husband was a rapist. "I didn't," Eliza started, but Catherine was done listening. "Get out. Pack whatever you own. The trader comes tomorrow at dawn." Eliza fled, ran to the kitchen where Betty was preparing dinner. "She's selling me," Eliza gasped. "Selling me south. Tomorrow." Betty's face went ashen. "Oh, baby. Oh, no. What do I do? Where do I go?" "You run," Betty said firmly. "Tonight. You run and you don't look back." "Run where? How?" "North. Follow the North Star. There are people who help. It's dangerous, but it's better than being sold south." Charlotte and Mary helped her pack the few things she owned. Gave her food from the kitchen, a blanket, a knife. Samuel drew her a rough map showing the direction north, the forests that offered cover, the roads to avoid. That night, while Catherine slept deeply under laudanum and the house was quiet, Eliza Washington, she chose the surname herself, in that moment, slipped out the back door. She was 17 years old, 2 months pregnant, and running for her life. She'd killed her rapist. She'd survived months of torture. Now she was choosing freedom, or death trying.
Sometimes survival means becoming dangerous. Sometimes the only way out of hell is through it. If Eliza's story affected you, if it made you uncomfortable in the right ways, if it changed how you think about slavery and resistance, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to understand that history is complicated, that victims aren't always perfect, that survival sometimes requires violence. Leave a comment telling us, do you think Eliza was justified in what she did? Was it murder or self-defense? Is there a difference when you're enslaved? History doesn't give us easy answers, but it gives us Eliza Washington, a girl who refused to accept that powerlessness meant hopelessness. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and remember her name. The historical record has no definitive answer about what happened to Eliza Washington. There's no documentation of her sale, which suggests she escaped before the trader arrived. There's no record of her capture and return, which means either she made it north or died trying. But there are hints, fragments, possibilities. In 1858, a woman matching her description appeared at a Quaker settlement in Pennsylvania. She was pregnant, exhausted, traumatized. They took her in, helped her deliver her baby, a daughter. According to the Quakers' private journals, this woman had escaped slavery in South Carolina, had traveled hundreds of miles alone while pregnant, had a scar across her scalp where her hair had been cut badly. Was it Eliza? Possibly. The name was different. The woman called herself Elizabeth Freeman. But fugitive slaves often changed their names. This Elizabeth stayed with the Quakers for 2 years, then moved north to Canada where fugitive slave laws couldn't reach her. She lived to be 63 years old. Her daughter grew up free. If this was Eliza, and we'll never know for certain, then she won. She survived. She gave her daughter the life she never had. But maybe that's not what happened. Maybe Eliza died in those forests between South Carolina and Freedom. Maybe she was caught by slave catchers and sold south anyway. Maybe her baby was born enslaved and lived the same life Eliza was trying to escape. We don't know. The historical record is silent on Eliza's fate. What we do know is this: thousands of enslaved women lived Eliza's story, were raped by their masters, were blamed by their mistresses, were trapped between two tormentors with nowhere to run. Some survived, some didn't, but all of them deserve to be remembered. Eliza's story matters because it shows us something uncomfortable. Women participated in slavery's cruelty. White women weren't just passive beneficiaries of the system, they were active participants. They beat enslaved women for being raped. They blamed victims for their own assault. They used their power to punish girls who had no power at all. Catherine Harrison was a victim of her husband's infidelity, yes, but she chose to direct her rage at a teenage girl instead of the man who actually betrayed her. She chose cruelty over compassion. She chose to protect her social standing over protecting another woman. That choice matters because it shows how systems of oppression corrupt everyone within them. Catherine wasn't born cruel. She was taught that enslaved people weren't fully human, that their suffering didn't matter, that protecting white supremacy was more